The first panel, basically entitled Solution Finders, Innovation in Housing Finance from Other Communities. And like I said, other communities are working on this. We're not the only ones. Some of them are very successful, and we're going to hear from the successful ones to show that their strategies actually are working in their communities. So I'm going to introduce the moderator of this panel, Joe Reynolds. Joe Reynolds is the Director of Partnerships and Development for Social Innovation Canada. Joe collaborates with people in communities and regions across Canada and the globe to address the ways we live and work in order to achieve equity across our social, economic, and ecological systems. They provide support with the project development, strategy, social finance, impact measurement, social enterprise, and building relationships that unlock potential. Our social finance and housing group, which we've been meeting for the last 2.5 years, participated with Social Innovation Canada on their study of the financialization of housing with specific focus on rural communities. So at this point, I'd like to introduce and welcome Joe Reynolds, who will introduce the panel. And I will be kind of timekeeper, I think, and let Derek know when we got a minute left. I'll just give the signal. He can put a chat in there. We got to compress a little bit to get back on schedule, but this is all good. So Joe, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Jack. And thank you to the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay for inviting us here today. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm calling in from the lands of the Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy in Kingston. And just before we get into the panel, I've been invited to share a very brief description of community wealth building. And with that, extend an invitation to you. If you're interested, Social Innovation Canada will be offering a community of practice in community wealth building starting in January, and I'll leave some information with you about that. At Social Innovation Canada, we work in collaboration with place-based and identity-based communities across the country, and we work together to address these complex issues and challenges that have a national relevance. And our focus is to create that transformational change that you are working on as well. And we have really valued our relationship with the Institute for Southern Georgian Bay through the Financialization of Housing Lab. So thanks, Jack, for pointing that out. So I'll start off with a very quick review of community wealth building. This was some work that we did with Audrey Jamal and Jordan Schulten at the University of Guelph. And we looked at 4 Canadian mid-sized cities, Kingston, London, Guelph, and Windsor, to look at how they were using community wealth building practices. So the next slide, please. So community wealth building is really, as Marilyn mentioned, how we wanted to look at how we can mobilize community wealth. How do we keep it sticky locally and support communities to have local ownership and control of their assets? Across Canada and the United States and many places, there are some very successful one-offs that we can learn from. But community wealth building can really work together to try to define a framework for local governments and scale some of these one-offs into something cohesive. So we work to coordinate with local governments, local economic development teams, and anchor institutions, and community leaders and organizations, helping to create that, identify the elements that the community is seeking to support, and what are some of the big picture opportunities that we can work on together to support community wealth building. Next slide, please. The Democracy Collaborative in the United States has been a really great leader in this area, and they look at 5 pillars of community wealth: progressive procurement with anchor institutions like community benefit agreements, fair work and living wage, locally rooted finance, which we heard a bit about today, democratically shared assets, and social productive or use of land, like land trusts, community land trusts. Next slide, please. So we know that in the past, our traditional approaches to local economic development has really been with municipal incentives to attract external companies to create local jobs and generate economic opportunities. And the relationship has been and continues to be really between businesses and municipalities. The community hasn't been at the table much. The next slide, please. And sometimes what's happened is we've seen that that's put communities at risk. when there's been plant closures and changes. So the community wealth approach is wanting to look at a more holistic and different way of creating more stability, I guess, in local economies. Next slide, please. So I'd mentioned sort of a holistic view. So it's also looking at community well-being and the quality of life. How do we build inclusive economic development? What are some equitable and sustainable ways that we can diversify economic opportunities within communities and support the local actors and residents, like in nonprofits and institutions? And also, as it's identified here, how can we really support and leverage the Sustainable Development Goals? Just one or two more slides. You can change it now, please. So our engagements in the research, we talked with numerous organizations across the 4 cities, and they gave us their feedback on how they're using community wealth. Next slide, please. And we saw lots of local social procurement policies and sustainable procurement policies. We saw it in housing, efforts around decent work, local investments, community benefit agreements, how to leverage local assets, and supporting locally owned companies. Next slide, please. And I encourage you again to check out the Democracy Collaborative. They have an action guide for advancing community wealth building that is really helpful. And I don't have it mentioned here, but there is a really great report that was placed out by the United Way in Windsor, all about Ontario, mid-sized cities, and building community wealth in Ontario's mid-sized cities. So excellent examples in that report as well. Next slide, please. And so finally, an extension to each of you, if you're interested in joining a community of practice, that helps to build connections with others across the country who are advancing these practices or just wanting to learn about them. We'll share with each other. We'll bring in some experts from the field, and it starts in January. It'll be the second Thursday of every month. And there's my email address, so the organizers can put you in touch with me, and I'm happy to share the information about that. And now I would like actually to now turn our attention to who we're here to engage with today, which is this really great panel. Our first presenter is Colleen, and she is CEO of John Q. Public Impact. And Colleen Sklar is the principal of the Creative Resolutions. She collaborates with leaders from municipal, provincial, and federal and Indigenous governments, as well as the business community and civil society. Her work is marked by a commitment to developing innovative solutions to build strong and prosperous communities. So she's just the type of person we want to hear from. And Colleen, you're going to speak to us, I think, about how collaboration is possible and the ways in which you've worked towards collaboration in your work.
Thank you very much, Joe. I thank you all for allowing me to come and speak with you today. I'm joining you from sunny Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Treaty 1 territory today, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm just going to get the slides up. So as Joe has mentioned, my name is Colleen Sklar, and I'm from working with a group of innovative municipalities to create a municipal participation corporation. So John Q. Public has been working in really experimenting in the space of collaboration. So in next slide, please. Yeah, perfect. So John Q. Public is a nonprofit municipal participation corporation. And in 2017, it was formed by a group of municipalities in and around the Winnipeg metropolitan region. It was a coalition of the willing who wanted to find ways to work together. Really, they focused on collaboration versus amalgamation and annexation. So the municipalities really got together and moved from a traditional competitive approach to a collaborative approach where all communities work together to deliver and support the delivery of strategic infrastructure and services across our communities. Next slide, please. The municipalities that are participating really, they range from 1,200 residents right up to 16,000 residents. So there really was no difference this landscape is very similar to what we see in a lot of places across Canada around large metropolitan centers. We have, communities large and small that are all trying to address problems themselves. So John Q. Public really brings them into a table where they can start to work together. And so the municipalities all are at the table, equal partners in John Q. Public. One share It's a share capital corporation, one share, one community. Doesn't matter how big or how small you are. And together you can see when you add up the numbers, they're a pretty powerful force there. The next slide, please. And as I mentioned, the geography is around the Winnipeg metropolitan region and beyond. So our project scope that I'm going to talk about really goes way beyond the actual geography of where those communities lie. The key principles of John Q. Public are, sorry, next slide, please. The key principles really for John Q. Public that were developed in 2017 were to maximize the value of each taxpayer's investment, to consider the risk and reward of everything they did, including the risk to the environment and health and safety and the economy, to utilize economies of scale, to construct and to get better value for communities, to utilize, sorry, next slide, to utilize best practices, to think of future generations, to act now, invest now for our future. We heard, through the various presentations already this morning, that this problem is just getting worse. So we have to think about investing now for the future, and to work as partners with business and industry. So in one of the first projects next slide, please, one of the first projects they got busy at was JQ Built. So JQ Built really is a response to building community infrastructure, that necessary economic enabling infrastructure. Next slide, please. In 2021, the federal government committed to a Canada-wide childcare initiative, and the province of Manitoba received, quite a large amount of funding, as did every province across Canada, to deliver childcare in our communities. So, with that in mind, next slide, please. The mayors and reeves who lead John Q. Public and JQ Built, the project delivery arm, created really this a way forward to take advantage of the childcare space and to start to deliver the infrastructure these small communities needed. So we basically developed JQ Built, which is the project delivery arm. It is the board of elected officials who run JQ Built. So how we got it going was we assembled a team of CAOs, board members, and experts in the field and business and industry, from architects to design builders, to those who really had experience in owners representing in the project management and project delivery. And we created a process delivery team. Next slide, please. One of the first things we did is we established some key principles for the project. And so we basically developed a process delivery method and project management that could meet all the regulatory requirements for daycare, that could create a hybrid construction process. And that process could expedite timelines, allow us to really utilize best quality, utilize local materials, energy efficiency, ensure we had Indigenous design elements. These buildings, because the municipalities would be the ultimate owners, and I'm sure you can appreciate, they wanted to make sure they were low maintenance, that they were low, very, very resilient and durable, but also had very low operating costs. And so with all of this in mind, we went to the market and we started to partner with a local design builder who was able to create us a design that we're not only able to replicate over and over across Manitoba, but we're also able to transport what we've learned to other jurisdictions across Canada. This was the beginning of our Daycare in a Box pilot project. Next project. So the team really got to work, and the team included everybody from, the federal government, Indigenous governments, provincial governments, in early learning and childcare here in Manitoba. Our province was incredibly supportive of this here and put people as point on this project. Our team included architects, engineers. We brought in legal, CPAs, a quantity surveyor, financial managers, and we brought in the absolute services and advice of a prefabrication lab here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And with this team, next slide, and the John Q 3-step process, we were able to deliver on budget and advance our timelines significantly, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So the John Q, what we really did was we realized that for local governments, often the problem was capacity, risk, and really being able to manage all of these. And I think Marilyn said, people riding off in all directions. And so the John Q three-step process really is about giving everybody clear direction on who does what, when, and where. And this process is, we've used it now. You'll see 22 times now. Not completed it 22 times, but we've used it, and we have 22 projects on the go right now with this system. And it really tells everybody how we can work together as a team to deliver. And we really think that this is process management or change management that can be utilized across many fields, not just daycare and not childcare, but also housing, etc. So we're really excited about it. And with this process, next slide, please, we undertook phase 1 of the project, which included communities that were outside of the basic John Q public group, but anybody who wanted to participate was included. And you'll notice we have First Nations as well involved in this. Then we took on phase 2. Next slide, please. That was phase 1B. We added more communities that were even further afield. Then now we're in the middle of phase 2. Next slide, please. So you can see that the communities are got further out from our core group, and really the project is continuing today. Next slide, please. So really through the impressive team with our 3-step process and the provincial, federal, and municipal governments willing to work together in a new way, we broke ground in February of 2023 with our first 9 projects. And we actually had kids in 4 of the daycares by September, and 2 of them opened in August. I think anybody in the room will know that these timelines are incredibly impressive. So we really, feel that we've got a model that can be transported and used not only across other jurisdictions, but for other problems that local governments, provincial governments, and federal governments are looking at tackling. Next slide, please. And so, as I said, today we have 22 facilities that are underway right now. 8 of them are already open and have kids in them. And we've got another 5 that'll be open just after Christmas. So anyways, thank you so much. And I look forward to any questions when we go to the Q&A period. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Colleen, for that very, very inspiring experience to share with us. I'm sure it's sparking a lot for the audience, and we look forward to having a bit of time to have some follow-up questions at the end. I am going to move us forward, though, and introduce us to Ashley Smith, who's the owner and managing director of Fundamental Inc. She's headquartered in Newfoundland, and their firm has a focus on climate action. But Ashley's going to speak to us a bit about, how money is not the barrier, and that the community process of how a community together can get to innovation. So I'll pass it on to you, Ashley. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. So I am joining you from Newfoundland and Labrador, the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, the Uktahamguk, the Mi'kmaq, the Innu, and the Inuit. So thanks, Joe, for that explanation. Fundamental Inc. is a climate action consulting firm, but we take a pretty broad definition on what constitutes climate action. Next slide, please. So we work with municipalities as probably more than 50% of our business. And we look at eco-asset management things, we look at GHG emissions things, and then also we look at climate vulnerability aspects, which include everything from the weather impacts, but also justice issues associated with it, with the changing climate and vulnerable populations and equity deserving groups. And that ties us really closely into housing that's affordable. Next slide, please. So part of our ethos when delivering any project is that we always look for what is shown in the top. It's my right, it might be your left, I'm not sure. The top part of the slide with the turquoise, where we're looking at sustainable. So you want low vulnerability in all of the broad definitions of what low vulnerability means, and you want low carbon solutions. Lower energy, lower carbon, and low vulnerability, as Colleen mentioned, always mean more durable, less costly, better functioning. And so we're always aiming for that as part of the decision criteria as how we're moving forward. Next slide, please. So I'll get into the details. This is a this is a diagram that took a long time to put together. This is the result of two phases of a CMHC solutions lab looking specifically at business model innovation to provide housing that's affordable in rural, very low population density spaces. So Newfoundland and Labrador is spread out across a long coast. And most of our communities have less than 1,000 people. Oftentimes they have less than 500. And so those municipalities on their own, again, as Colleen mentioned, it's a capacity issue. So sometimes they have capability, but there is no capacity, not in terms of like human resources, but also cost resources. And so we were looking at if we can take a collective mindset and pull municipalities together and operate in sort of a third-party delivery way, is there a model that we can look at to try and create housing that's affordable in these communities? And so we started to look at that. So we liaised with a number of affordable housing providers in the province. And the things that always came up is that where they operated a not-for-profit space, accessing capital through a debt means or through concessionary means or anything is very tricky, because not-for-profits are very seldom like lent any substantial amount of money, especially for things that are seen as risky as construction projects. So we had that concern. And then the other concern is that where the space is underfunded in the province, though the not-for-profits who are working in that space end up as unintended adversaries, because they're positioned where they have to apply for a pool of money that's too small to deliver the project. And so instead of working together, as Colleen and Marilyn said, everyone sort of runs in all directions instead of working together. And so we, through iterative conversations with accountants, tax lawyers, the provincial housing and poverty reduction departments, the local providers for affordable housing, and then our own experience with construction and net zero carbon construction. And we went through this process where we came up with this particular model. So the social purpose REIT is not a REIT like you would think of, you know, like the big plazas or the smart centers. This is actually just a trust, a private trust that then checks all of the boxes for the tax advantages for through the Income Tax Act. And we paired that entity with a charity. The public foundation seemed to be the right fit at the time, where we were looking at 3.5% of all assets must be moved. That needs to be reevaluated for the 5%, but the logic is still the same. So the charity has a share class within the REIT that holds all of the voting equity units, and then external investors can be debt-based or non-voting equity units. That's looking at patient capital and like social finance intermediaries, that kind of thing. And then internal contributors are folks like municipalities who can contribute by leasing or selling their land or assets into the REIT. And so in doing that, the charity is allowed to raise funds, can issue tax receipts, and then has to roll that money into providing housing that's affordable. And then the REIT itself delivers the construction projects in the same way that a traditional REIT would deliver the construction projects. What happens is the net profits are then directed back into the charity, which is allowed to raise funds that then roll forward or partner with other existing charities that are spread across the province already delivering services to vulnerable groups. And so that could be like rent supplements or mental health supports or daycare development, those kinds of things. And then that gives you two avenues with which to address the issue holistically. So you can look at home as the physical shelter, and then home and community as all of the services that need to go along with it. And you have two avenues for driving funding into that. The other helpful thing is that a REIT is a reasonably well-trusted mechanism for accessing capital of various aspects, and was recommended to us by several of our project contributors as being a very stable way to deliver the project. So I think I'll stop there. If anyone has questions, we can ask in the Q&A. We can go to the last slide. I think it's just a thank you slide. Anyone who wants to talk to me outside about how this is happening is good as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ashley, for introducing us to that model. I imagine that there will be some follow-up questions. It looks like there's a lot of possibility, but also requires some deeper dives into fully understanding. But very interesting to see how this could work for small and rural communities. So thanks for sharing those insights and lessons. We are going to move forward to introduce our next panelist, Lindsay Harris. Lindsay is a community consultant with Propolis Housing Cooperative. She lives in Kamloops, BC, and she has a background in agriculture and food systems, affordable housing, community economic development, rural and small city resilience, and grassroots community decision-making. And Lindsay, you're going to bring to us an example of the community bond and how that's worked in the co-op, I think at the co-op level. So we're looking forward to hearing your example. And then I'm really hoping that we'll have time for a few questions from the floor, as I'm sure that people are very curious at this stage. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks so much for the introduction, and I'm so delighted to have the opportunity to share our story with you. I'm joining the call today from the unceded territory of the Secwepemc peoples here in Kamloops, BC. So let me get started and tell you a little bit about Propolis Housing Co-op and what it is that we're building. So if you want to move forward the slide. I will give you the very quick summary of this whole presentation. Right now, we are in the process of raising $1.1 million in community bonds to help us acquire the property for our first net zero affordable cooperative housing development. It'll be a mixed use development with 50 affordable units and commercial space. And we've raised, as of October 31st, $863,000 in investments and pledges, which includes a really substantial investment from Thrive Impact Fund of $270,000, which we just gratefully announced this week. Next slide, please. So let me tell you where propolis gets its name from. We're inspired by the concept of bee propolis, which is the resinous mixture that honeybees use to fill the gaps in their hive. And our group is inspired by this desire to build a community where nobody falls through the cracks, where everyone has access to the homes that they need. And propolis also has, protective qualities. It protects the hive from disease. And so we're, really inspired by this metaphor of how the work that we do can provide more resilience for our community. Next slide, please. So Propolis is a brand new nonprofit housing co-op organization. Our mandate is to develop affordable and sustainable homes in Kamloops. And we've announced our first project, but we're really intending to do this work over the coming decades. We want to ultimately build and operate a network of multifamily buildings. Right now, we're a very grassroots operation. We're fully volunteer-led. Our development is led by myself, who come from a background in food security work and community economic development, and really saw the interconnection between trying to resolve household food insecurity and the lack of affordable housing in our community. Noticed that a few years ago and thought, you know what, let's also work on affordable housing at the same time. Our project is co-led by Miles Pruden, who is the owner of Next Build Construction. which is a local firm here in Kamloops that specializes in affordable and net zero building strategies. Next slide, please. So like many communities across the country, Kamloops is experiencing significant increase in housing prices, a significant housing affordability gap, and this puts strain on our social housing system, results in greater inequality in the community. And right now in Kamloops, there's not any other organizations that are working on building below market rentals. We have some fabulous organizations in the community that focus on social and supportive housing, subsidized housing, but the affordability problem is so widespread now that it's affecting so many families, families that working families that are being priced out of the market. And so our target is to work in that middle space. We're aiming to price the monthly fee for our residential units at 80% of median market rents, which is approximately 55% of current market rents. And so we're aiming to offer a significant level of affordability to everyone that would live in the building. Next slide, please. So the province of BC has recently announced mandated housing targets for 10 communities in the province, prioritizing those communities that have the greatest housing need. And Kamloops is one of those 10 municipalities. And so the province of BC has set out that Kamloops is required to build 4,236 net new housing units in the next 5 years. And a significant portion, 1,320 of those units, need to be below market rentals. So that works out to an average of 847 units that we need to build per year. And in this year, 2023, up to August 31st, the city of Kamloops had only issued 179 building permits. And that's not even taking into account how many of those units need to be below market rentals. So as a community, we're well below what we need to achieve in terms of targets. And so we really need our whole community and all levels of government coming to the table to make this happen, to address the housing crisis that we're facing. Next slide, please. So what is Propolis proposing to build? By 2026, we are planning to build our first project, a 6-story apartment that will include 50 affordable residential units ranging in size from bachelor suites up to 3 bedrooms. We're located in the heart of the North Shore, which has traditionally been one of the neighborhoods of lower socioeconomic status in Kamloops, and we really want to contribute to ensuring affordability in that neighborhood as it redevelops over time. All of the residential units that we're proposing will be net zero and incorporate universal design. And we have a number of different strategies that we would include in the building to ensure that that net zero approach, including thermal mass, nighttime purge cooling, solar heat collection, heat pumps, and drain water heat recovery. Co-op housing is a great fit for a diverse range of residents, including families, professionals, retirees, and students, focusing on people who are priced out of the housing market here. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the co-op housing model, nonprofit housing co-ops are owned and operated democratically by their members. Members purchase a moderately priced share. For Propolis, that's right now set at $2,000, pay a monthly housing fee, and enjoy secure long-term tenancy for as long as they need the home. Next slide, please. Just want to highlight a couple of the incredible projects that Next Build Construction has completed recently. Their pilot residential building with their net zero strategies was a 4-plex in Kamloops, and it's right now the best performing multifamily building for energy use in Kamloops. They also recently completed a childcare facility. And that childcare facility is not only fully net zero and energy independent, but it also was built at a significantly more affordable price point than the average childcare space in the province of BC. The average cost of building a childcare space here at the time that this building was completed was $40,000 per space, and this building came in at $27,000 per space. So we're really quite excited about the approach that Next Build can take to both build in a more sustainable way, but to ensure affordability while they're doing it. Next slide, please. So let me tell you a little bit about our financing model, because we are using a community-led approach called community bonds. So our target is to raise $1.1 million in propolis bonds that will allow us to purchase the property for our first development. So a community bond is a proven social finance tool that's been used before, significantly in Ontario. There's been a lot of community bond campaigns. There's been very few in Western Canada, and we're certainly the first in Kamloops. A community bond functions very similar to a traditional bond. It's an interest-bearing loan that a nonprofit or cooperative can issue to finance a project that we're undertaking. Individuals, businesses, and foundations can invest in community bonds. And our bonds right now are on sale in British Columbia, Manitoba, and Ontario. The interest is paid out according to a schedule that we set and at a fixed term. And investors can choose to redeem their principal, or at the end of the term, they could reinvest, excuse me, in any new propolis bonds that might be available. Next slide, please. So these are the terms. Sorry, excuse me. These are the terms that we've set for our propolis bonds. You can see that you can invest as at a minimum of $1,000 and earn 2.5% interest over a 3-year term. And then our apiary series has folks investing at a minimum of $10,000, and they can earn up to 3.5% interest over a 3-year term. So these, the nice thing about a community bond approach is that the organization who's issuing the bonds we can set out our own terms, that work for the financial model for the project that we're building. Next slide, please. Some of the benefits of choosing a community bond are how flexible, nimble, and empowering they are. Affordable housing development benefits from a diverse financing package. And that's a polite way of saying that it's incredibly hard to build affordable below market housing in the current development climate, and it takes financing from so many different sources to make it happen. You need a diverse number of financing partners at the table, and community bonds is a great tool to add to that mix. The flexible terms that we can determine allowed us to structure the offering to match the needs of the project and to match our ability to repay. And community bonds help, particularly in the early stages of a project, to reduce dependence on funder timelines and restrictions. And it also, really shows, credibility to other lenders when you have the community coming behind a project like this. Community bonds are also values aligned for us. So as a cooperative, we're really interested in keeping investment dollars in our community. There's a growing network of social impact investors across the country that are looking for these types of investments. And community bonds are really inclusive. With an investment minimum starting at $1,000, really anybody in our community who's in a position to invest some money is able to invest in this project. Next slide, please. So just to give you a quick overview of what our timeline looks like, we are on track to acquire the property this fall. We'll have a pre-development phase and hope to start construction by next summer with occupancy in 2026. This is a really ambitious timeline, and we may need to push it back. But we know that the housing crisis is so significant, and we're just really committed to doing what we can do to make a difference in that space. So I'll stop there and hope to engage with folks with questions.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you so much. We've just been introduced to 3 very compelling models for community wealth and community collaboration. We are at time for the time that we have for the panel. So I'm going to turn to the folks in the room to see if you'd like to extend for a couple of questions or how you'd like to move forward.
Thank you, Joe and panel. We are tight for time, but what we'd like to do is offer anyone who does have any questions to come to this microphone here. I also have a runner. This is also our coffee, tea, and bio break block. So if you don't have a question and would like to take a break, we just ask that you try and funnel through the side aisles so we don't interrupt the camera, and as quietly as possible so we can still have this great connection with our Zoom. But if we can give them all a round of applause first, and thank you. And then we can open it up to questions. And I can run with this one.
Okay, so there will be a run for questions. If you need a coffee, there's coffee downstairs in by the gallery. You're allowed to take coffee back, but the cup has to have a lid on it. Also, there's water filling stations down there, so bring your water bottle with you and you can fill it up. So first question we have. No, this gentleman was first. So he was standing ready before we even announced that we could have questions. So just give your name quickly. Usually go right up to the microphone and then we'll go on to the second question.
Thank you very much. This question is for the community bond presenter. Could you elaborate on where the interest gets paid out of, to get paid out of the bond investments, and what's the security other than the community if the project does not proceed? So how does the bond get repaid to the investors if the project does not proceed?
That's a great question, and thanks for asking. So one of the things I'll say is that I think that community bonds are most effective as a tool when they are used for the purchase of an asset. And so, in our case, the bond holders will have a security registered against the property that we're purchasing. And so, especially when you're from a small town, you're going out to your friends and neighbors to say, hey, we really want you to invest in this project. We feel a significant weight of responsibility to be very responsible with the project that we're proposing, and to know that we're doing everything that we can to reduce their risk. So we do have a security registered against the property itself. The property that we're purchasing has an existing commercial building on it. And so we will have some commercial rent revenues before we tear down the building to redevelop. So we will have stable income while we're in the planning phase for the project. And then our intent, because we've set a 3-year term for the bonds, our intent is to secure sufficient development financing to repay the bond funds at the end of that 3-year term. But we also have the option to offer a reinvestment campaign at the end of 3 years. And from past experience with other organizations that have run community bonds, if investors are offered a reinvestment opportunity, the average is that 70% of them will choose to reinvest. So we think that that's also a really viable option for us at the end of the 3-year term.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, madam.
Yep, question for Ashley. Ashley, I'm sure it's my eyes and the slide, but tell me exactly what REIT stands for.
My apologies. I should have said that. REIT is Real Estate Investment Trust. And so it's the legal organizational structure that like most large developers will use to develop. And so like a lot of the condos that you'll see going up everywhere are REITs. Like every Costco or like Smart Center Plaza, that's a REIT. There's several different kinds out there. A traditional REIT is like a public company that you buy shares in, and like you would invest like if you were going to buy stocks on the stock market, something like that. And so the REIT that we were looking at was a slightly different model. It wouldn't be public, and you couldn't buy shares on a stock exchange or anything like that. But we were trying to take advantage of all of the Income Tax Act benefits that go along with developing properties. And that was the mechanism. So what happens is it's a trust in the same way that you can create a private trust. And the real estate investment trust portion is that you check, there's a checklist that the CRA has, and you were able to check all of those boxes. Does that answer your question? Okay, I think I see your head nodding. So.
Two quick questions to the microphone here.
Hi, this is another question for the Propolis project. I was just wondering what your cost structure looked like with going to a net zero construction model versus, say, the longer term savings of those, which I would imagine are increased upfront costs with, say, your water recycling, your heat pumps, that kind of stuff. I was just wondering how that sort of looked. Did you see some savings kind of thing? Thank you.
It's a very important part of our financial model that it is lower cost to operate a net zero building over the life of the building. So that's definitely factored into our modeling. But we are also working very closely with Next Build Construction to demonstrate that it is possible to build net zero upfront at or below conventional construction costs. We often have this impression that in order to build net zero, your construction costs need to be much higher. And Next Build is really trying to sort of flip that narrative. And they've demonstrated it with very effectively with a couple of pilot buildings. And so we're really optimistic that we're both going to be looking at very affordable construction costs and at lower lifetime operational costs for the building.
Okay, great. One last question.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to ask the question. This whole conversation has been so inspiring to someone who has sometimes felt at a loss. Where do we go from here? But my question is with regard to the community bonds, are these tax deductible? Can the investor then use that investment to get a tax receipt from either provincial or federal or both?
So that's a great question. And so right now for Propolis, with our first offering, our bonds are not eligible to be held in an RSP or TFSA account. So these, are like just a standard investment where the interest would be taxable. We hope for our next offering that we will be able to offer those to be eligible for RSP or TFSA. And there was just, for our first offering, there's a significant learning curve in navigating all of those regulations. And there's also an upfront cost that we would have needed to cover upfront in order to get that eligibility. And so we just weren't prepared to do it for our first offering, but we do hope to be able to do it for our second offering.
Thank you.
Let's give a big round of applause to our panelists and to our moderator. Thank you all. This is a topic that needs much more than 50 minutes to discuss. This is just a taste of what is actually happening. What's really encouraging is that we're seeing these things operating successfully. And that means that these can be replicated in different communities. And so it's part of the equation to be able to bring more affordable housing. Now, I forgot to mention earlier, the slides will all be available on the Institute website. I noticed some people taking pictures of them. All the slides will be available on the website once we get them all curated, et cetera. Now, we have 10 minutes. So, you know, I want you all back in your seats in 10 minutes so that we can welcome the second panel and on non-market development. Again, so much information that we're going to be able to get. So come on back in. We want to start back on time because we want to stay on schedule. Thank you all very much.